crackdown after his administration says the National Guard shooting suspect should have never been allowed in the U.S. Trump is spending the holiday weekend at his Florida resort. Weijia Jiang is traveling with the president. Weijia, good morning.
Good morning to you, Vlad, and good morning to everybody. In response to that shooting, President Trump has announced new policy proposals to curb immigration, even threatening to expel migrants who are already here in the United States, who are not a, quote, net asset to the country.
President Trump blames the Biden administration for allowing the shooting suspect into the U.S.
There was no vetting or anything. They came in unvetted. And we have a lot of others in this country. We're going to get them out.
CBS News' Nancy Cordes pressed Trump on what his own administration found about the more than 76,000 Afghan nationals who entered the U.S. after the chaotic end to the Afghan war in 2021.
Your DOJ IG just reported this year that there was thorough vetting by DHS and by the FBI of these Afghans who were brought into the U.S. So why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let them in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here. And you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person.
The Department of Homeland Security now says it will be reviewing all asylum cases approved under the Biden administration. And officials tell CBS News the Trump administration has directed that all current asylum decisions be paused. A DHS official tells CBS News the suspect's asylum case was approved under the Trump administration earlier this year.
When it comes to asylum, when they're flown in, it's very hard to get them out.
Trump also announced he would permanently pause migration from, quote, third world countries and called for a review of all green card holders from 19 countries of concern, including Haiti, Iran, and Afghanistan. Sean Van Diver is an advocate for Afghan migrants.
This shooter is solely responsible for this period. My number one concern is that all these 195,000 Afghans that came here during the last administration are going to be painted with the brush of this man.
And in a new announcement, President Trump says he is canceling all executive orders that former President Biden signed using an auto pen instead of his hand. Trump, without evidence, claims that when the auto pen was used, Biden was not involved. Biden has repeatedly addressed the attacks on his use of the auto pen, insisting that he was the one who made decisions when it came to executive orders, pardons, and legislation. Lindsay?
All right, folks. Yes. Our El Presidente is at it again. Are you a stupid person? Sorry, caller. As I just said a few minutes ago, we can't take calls. So, you know, there's no call. We don't have any phones today. Hopefully, we will have that sorted out by next week. But keep listening. Keep listening. As you heard in the news story there, that the Capitol shooting, there was a Capitol shooting on November the 26th, where a man named Rahmanullah Lakanwal, who is 29 years old from Afghanistan, allegedly ambushed two members of the West Virginia National Guard while they were on duty just blocks from the White House. One guardsman, a young woman named Sarah Beckstrom, was killed, and the other, a young man named Andrew Wolf, was critically wounded. Lakanwal was shot during the confrontation with the troops, taken into custody, and is now hospitalized. This shooter, alleged shooter, Rahmanullah Lakanwal, allegedly entered the United States in 2021 under the resettlement program under Operation Allies Welcome, which was for the Afghan allies who helped us out in Afghanistan while we were supposedly fighting the Taliban. According to the reports, he worked for a CIA-backed unit in Afghanistan. Now, the motive remains unclear. Authorities have described it as a targeted attack, but they have not publicly confirmed their motive. Investigators are probing the case as a potential act of terrorism, international terrorism, and some sources are suspected that suggest that the suspect had strong personal distress. He allegedly revered a former Afghan commander whose death deeply affected him, and that grief may have been a factor in the shooting. Now, this case is extremely important because, once again, it seems to be another instance of blowback in our policy, American foreign policy. At first, when this first happened, oh my God, you saw the MAGA elites. They just were happy to come and blame the Democrats, and they said that it was rhetoric. It was calling people fascist who are actually fascists and doing fascist things, like weaponizing the military and the police force to completely trample people's civil rights and civil liberties, was what was to blame for this shooting. But once they found out that it was a Muslim, they doubled back to blaming Islam. Oh, he's an Islamic fundamentalist. He's an Islamic extremist. And then the real truth came out. That this gunman, suspected gunman, who was an Afghan national, was a part of the CIA, part of our forces that we armed in Afghanistan. Damn. Yes. He was a part of our death squads. We trained this man. And we granted him refugee asylum status here in the United States because he was helping us out. Or should I say our government out. Not helping me out, because you know how I feel about all these wars if you listen to the show. He was actually recruited at 15 years old. So that gives you a perspective on what exactly our government is doing in these countries that they invade. We are getting teenage boys. We are training them to become mercenaries and then turning them loose in society. Whether it's their society or our society, but we are taking these kids and turning them loose. And so this young man was recruited at 15 years old to kill for the CIA and was assigned to a death squad. You hear me? A death squad of the #1 drug lord in Afghanistan. That's who we are creating over there in Afghanistan and Iraq and these types of countries. He was recruited at 15 to serve the 0 unit, what is called the 0 unit. 0 unit number 3. And it's also known as the Kandahar Strike Force, which was led by a warlord named Ahmad Wali Karzai, who is the #1 drug lord in Afghanistan. Mind you, we're about to go to war with Venezuela. We're going to talk about that later on. Okay? Over drugs, over opiates. While at the same time we're helping the drug dealers in Afghanistan, where all the heroin and OxyContin that's killing all of our people is coming from. And so the 0 units were the American proxy forces that operated at the direction of our government, the CIA, and the special forces in Afghanistan. Now, what did these forces do? Mostly they did night raids. Night raids. These night raids were assassination missions. And they were deployed all over the country to kill people that the American government suspected of being the Taliban, or a part of the Taliban, should I say. Now, here's where it really gets sick and depressing. These militias that we were creating, our CIA and our forces in Afghanistan, these militias that we were building actually were engaged in sex trafficking of these young men. Yes, sex trafficking. These militias practice something called bacha-basi, which was a practice where underage boys were sex trafficked and sold. And so this young man who's 29 years old, we recruited him at 15. So for the last 14 years of his life, this young man has been dealing with the trauma of not only being a part of an assassination force that our government, trained him to be a part of, but also being sex trafficked and likely sexually abused by the forces that we created in Afghanistan. And after all this, Joe Biden, our president, brought him into the country through a program called Operation Allies. So just think about that. We took this young man at 15 years old, turned him into a killer, let him be raped and molested and sex trafficked by the top drug dealer, drug lord, warlord in Afghanistan. And then we brought him here where he couldn't get a decent job after all he's done for us or done for our government. They didn't break him off with a bunch of money. They didn't do anything. They didn't get him some help. They probably should have institutionalized him and said, look, bro, you need to be in a mental hospital or something. After all that you've seen and after all you've done and after all you've been through. They probably should have done that. But instead, they turned him loose and let him exist within American society with all this trauma caused by us, mind you, and just said, hey, well, whatever happens, happens. Now, America has a long history of taking in foreigners who, were in wars. We actually took the Nazis, a lot of the Nazis. Look up Operation Paperclip, where our government literally brought Nazis, Werner von Braun and all these people to America. And our NASA program was, at least on some levels, helmed by Nazis. At one point, one of the NATO chiefs was a former Nazi. But we took care of the Nazis. We took care of them. We didn't just bring them here and say, hey, go live in the ghetto somewhere, or go live in the hood somewhere, or go, get in where you fit in, fool, We took care of them. One of the great tragedies of World War II was that the Nazis who we brought here with Operation Paperclip were treated better than the black GIs who fought against the Nazis and were forced to live in redlined and poverty-stricken communities throughout the nation, which is one of the reasons why there's still such a persistent wealth gap between blacks and whites in this country. Because white people who fought in World War II were able to buy houses in neighborhoods where their houses could accumulate interest and accumulate capital, accumulate wealth. They could open businesses with their houses. They could send their kids to college with their houses. They could do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of stuff when you have owned property in the right neighborhood. The black GIs were basically said, hold your own. Here's a ghetto. Hold your own. And so we have a long, long practice of saying one thing to the American people. These are the most evil people in the history of the world. they're the worst thing since the Nazis, and then we bring them to America and put them in and integrate them into our society. And then we wonder why we have blowback. Blowback. Now, there are some, now, I'm not going to get too conspiratorial here, but I will say there's a lot of talk about Google searches in recent time. And one thing people who've gone on Google and looked at Google Trends have found is that before the shooting, both the gunman's name, the alleged gunman's name, and the woman who was killed, both of them were trending. Both of their names were trending. Somebody was looking them up on the internet more than usual, more than average, before the shooting happened. Now, does that mean that this shooter was some sort of I want to say Manchurian candidate, or some sort of, some sort of MK Ultra slave who was programmed to go off and kill, one of our soldiers? I'm not going to say that. I don't have proof of that, but I'm just saying that those are some of the claims that are out there. But it is strange. You might want to look into that if you get an opportunity to look into why the killer and the victim, the alleged killer and the victim, were trending, why people were looking them up. The same thing happened when Charlie Kirk was murdered, might I add. There was a spike in the name, in searches of the name Tyler Johnson, who was Charlie Kirk's alleged killer, like a month before he was murdered. And also Utah Valley State, and also the closest hospital to Utah Valley State University. And all of it came from Israel. All the searches came from Israel. Something that was just found out in the last week or two. For some reason, our Department of Homeland Security, their Twitter page is also set up in Israel. So again, you can take that with a grain of salt. But what we do know, focusing on what we do know that once again, that this is an incident of blowback. We invade these countries. We traumatize their people. And then it comes back to us in some capacity. I mean, it's really unfortunate, but this is how it usually goes. All right, folks, before we go to our first commercial break, I just wanted to pay tribute to a man, like I said, is one of the great musicians of the 20th century, one of the greatest guitar players of all time. You know his stylings from Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, Carla Thomas, Rufus Thomas, Johnny Taylor, the late Johnny Taylor, late great Johnny Taylor. We just had the mother, the first lady of house from right here in Gary, Indiana, here on Wednesday night. You might want to look that up on our Facebook. And she's talking about she loved her some Johnny Taylor. Well, this man was actually the guitar player on a lot of Johnny Taylor's greatest songs. He was also a producer. He was a member of the Blues Brothers with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. One of the greatest guitarists to ever lived. I'm talking about the late, great Steve Cropper. And so as we go to a break, I wanted to play one of my favorite songs from him when he was a member of Booker T and the MGs, the Stax record house band. This is Hip Hugger. We'll be right back after these.